started this conversation with the Wolfeboro Waters Committee. Gosh, I think it's a year and a half ago now, about the need to develop the watershed management plan for Wolfeboro Bay. So we're really happy to see it come to fruition. I want to thank the town of Wolfeboro and the Wolfeboro Waters Committee for their commitment to protecting Wolfeboro's water resources. And I also want to thank the other communities in the watershed that will be participating in this effort and for the work they do within their own communities. So funding for this project comes from several sources, including the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, which is administered by the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. So before I turn this over to Laura Deemer with FB Environmental, I want to just go over a few housekeeping items. Please keep your microphone muted throughout the meeting, unless you're asking a question or making a comment after the presentation. So we will take questions at the end. This just helps prevent any feedback or distracting noises for others. You can put your questions as we go in the chat room, and we will be monitoring those, and we will cover those at the end of the presentation. So thanks very much for your help with this. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Pat. Can everyone see my screen okay? Yes? Okay. Just get myself set up here. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, Pat. Welcome everyone. As Pat said, my name is Laura Deemer. I am a certified lake manager and environmental monitoring lead for FB Environmental Associates. I'll be kicking off the development of the watershed management plan for Wolfeboro Bay with this public presentation. And as Pat said, thanks everyone for being flexible and switching to this virtual presentation. I'm glad we could still make it work. And I hope everyone has stayed safe and warm inside. So just a little bit about FB Environmental Associates for those of you who may not be familiar with us. We are a small business founded on leading lake assessment and restoration projects. We currently have 12 dedicated water resource scientists on staff. Most of our work serves public sector clients such as federal and state environmental agencies, municipalities, and also nonprofits. We like to say that we work in the area where science meets civics, meaning that we try to bridge the gap between science and policy for effective decision-making by water resource managers. And we work throughout New England, and the bulk of our work is in New Hampshire. We also have offices in Dover, New Hampshire, which is where I work out of, and also Portland, Maine. We have extensive experience conducting water body assessments and developing watershed management plans. So the map on the left shows all the watersheds where we've completed assessments, which sum to well over 1,000 water bodies. And the thumbnails on the right showcase a sampling of watershed management plans that we've developed just in New Hampshire, many of which surround Lake Winnipesaukee. Just some examples: Wolfeboro Bay and Winter Harbor, Mary Meeting River and Lake, which feeds into Alton Bay, Lake Waukee and Winona, Wolfeboro Bay Inlet, and Lake Wentworth and Crescent Lake. More recently, we also completed plans for Lake Kennesaca, which feeds into Center Harbor, and Lake Winnisquam. So let me introduce you to the key people on the project team. I will be managing this project, and I'll be assisted by several capable FBE project scientists. We are also teaming with 2 outside firms, Horsley Witten and DK Water Resource Consulting. So Lori Kennedy is a professional stormwater engineer at Horsley Witten. She will be assisting with the watershed survey and drawing up conceptual designs for the high priority stormwater fixes that we identify. Don Kretschmer, also a certified lake manager, will be assisting me on the nutrient load model for Wolfeboro Bay. So as you all probably already know, Wolfeboro Bay is part of the larger Lake Winnipesaukee system, which is shown in this map. And because of the size of Lake Winnipesaukee, Pat at LWA has been working around the lake, developing watershed management plans for the major sub-watersheds. So watershed management plans that have already been completed include Wolfeboro Bay Inlet, Wolfeboro Bay and Winter Harbor, Meredith, Saunders, and Paugus Bays, and Lake Wakiwan and Winona. And now we're starting work on Wolfeboro Bay, which is shown here in the black circle. Much of the watershed to Wolfeboro Bay is covered by the Lake Wentworth and Crescent Lake Watershed Management Plan, but we are planning to update all that information for this plan. So the remaining watershed management plans include Alton Bay, which is also partially covered by the Merrymeeting Lake River and Lake Watershed Management Plan. Also the Broads, Center Harbor, which includes the Lake Winnipesaukee plan that was just created, the Tioga River and Silver Lake to the Merrimack River. So here's the watershed to Wolfeboro Bay. You can see that Lake Wentworth is a dominant water feature. The watershed is almost 37,000 acres, largely in the town of Wolfeboro, but it does extend into Brookfield, New Durham, Alton, and Ossipee. And so zooming into Wolfeboro Bay, we, for this project, are defining Wolfeboro Bay at the Barn Door Island. And so then that includes Jockey Cove and the South Wolfeboro Bay, as well as the waters around these island complexes to the south. So why are we here developing a watershed management plan for Wolfeboro Bay? I just want to kind of take a big step back and look at sort of the bigger picture. So lake ecosystems are complex and they reflect this balance of inputs and outputs of both material and energy that ultimately determines their water quality. And as humans, we've long loved the recreational and aesthetic benefits of lakes, but sometimes we do love our lakes too much. Our presence on the landscape in the last several hundred years has altered lake ecosystems in ways that make them less resilient and sometimes unable to support life in the way that they historically could. So forest land that once soaked up rainfall and stabilized soils has been cleared for our homes, our driveways, our roads. And instead of soaking up that rain, these impervious surfaces concentrate runoff into channelized flows that erode nutrient-laden sediments and other pollutants into lakes, where they can degrade water quality, damage critical habitat, and ultimately upset the natural balance of these lake ecosystems. One of the most critical nutrients to aquatic growth is phosphorus. And there's about 10 times the amount of phosphorus coming from developed land compared to the same parcel of forested land. And this has really important implications for water quality. The image you see on the left is from a classic experimental lake study in Canada, where they divided a lake with a thick yellow curtain. Carbon and nitrogen were added to the top portion of the photo, and carbon and phosphorus were added to the bottom portion of the photo. And you can see that phosphorus was the limiting nutrient and spurred a massive cyanobacteria algae bloom in that lake. And so because of this, phosphorus will be the primary focus of the Wolfeboro Bay Watershed Management Plan. Now, erosion and sedimentation is one of the major ways that phosphorus can end up in surface waters. So the watershed survey that we complete will include identifying eroded areas in the Wolfeboro Bay watershed. In rural areas, such as portions of that can be found in the Wolfeboro Bay watershed, soil erosion most often comes from roads. If not regularly maintained or controlled for incoming stormwater volumes. Road surfaces, shoulders, and ditches can quickly erode and can send large amounts of sediment carrying nutrients into surface waters. The photos you see here were taken within the Lake Winnipesaukee watershed during a spring survey and are examples of the types of road and culvert drainage issues that we regularly observe throughout the region. Other threats to water quality come from numerous other sources, such as septic systems, fertilizers, livestock, pets, legacy contaminants from historic activities that could be buried tanks or dumps, and also nuisance wildlife. Wolfeboro Bay and the surrounding areas in Lake Winnipesaukee are facing water quality challenges with cyanobacteria, namely Dolichospermum and Gliotrichia. These blooms can be difficult to track and therefore difficult to understand their source causes. A significant amount of work is being done through Wolfeboro Waters, a volunteer group appointed by the town of Wolfeboro, to better track and understand these blooms, which will be important for the restoration actions that will be recommended in the Wolfeboro Watershed Management Plan, and also for decision makers in informing the public on the health risks associated with potential cyanotoxins that may be coming from these cyanobacteria. So the watershed management plan that we will develop for Wolfeboro Bay will identify and quantify pollutant sources to Wolfeboro Bay, namely for phosphorus, as I mentioned. It'll set water quality goals and target phosphorus reductions that will be needed to meet those goals. It'll identify what we call best management practices, or BMPs. Basically, they're just, they could be a stormwater remediation or control that's put in, something structural, or they could be more general protection strategies, such as an ordinance update or a road best management practice. It'll outline a specific plan of action that has measurable targets and milestones that the LWA and local stakeholders can help track over time. And then the key piece to all of this is, once a watershed management plan is in place for Wolfeboro Bay, it'll make Wolfeboro Bay eligible for future federal grant funding for implementing the watershed management plan over the next 10 or more years. So just more generally, the watershed management plan is going to be addressing what's the problem, what's the target, where do we want to be, how do we fix the problem to reach that target, and then how do we fund the fixes. And you can think about the watershed management planning process as a cycle. So right now we are at the top of this cycle, where we're building public support. We're establishing a committee, we're engaging stakeholders. Moving into the spring, we'll be inventorying the watershed by completing various field surveys and gathering as much information as we can about Wolfeboro Bay and its watershed. We'll define the problems by completing a water quality analysis and running the models. We'll move into setting goals and developing solutions by getting public input and defining the water quality goal. Based on that goal and the field surveys, we'll be able to create an action plan and draft up and finalize the watershed management plan. Then once that process is done, we can move into the final phase in this cycle, which is implementation and evaluation. So LWA or the town can apply for grants to help fund those restoration actions. And then we recommend this cycle be repeated on a 10-year process, so that 10 years from now, you're starting at the top again re-engaging stakeholders, re-inventorying the watershed, so that and reevaluating the plan success, and what restoration actions were completed in that 10-year period. So this is a long-term ongoing process, as you know, some problems are identified and fixed, but then over the years, new problems can arise as well. So I wanted to move into the last part of my presentation, which is really addressing, you know, how can you as the public help, not only with this plan, but you know, moving forward in restoring and protecting Wolfeboro Bay. So these are some of the ways that you can help directly for developing this plan. We will be completing a shoreline survey sometime this summer. So we'll need some volunteer boaters. We'll need volunteers who are knowledgeable in parcel usage and history that can help us as we boat around and survey the shoreline from the water. We'll be completing a watershed survey. So any information that you have on known sources of pollutants or erosion, or just any areas of general concern that you feel we should try to evaluate in the field, that would be important to know as soon as possible, so that we don't miss anything when we go out there in the spring. And the septic survey. So LWA may want some volunteer assistance with doing some record searches at the towns, and building that database, which will help feed and inform the nutrient model that we run for Wolfeboro Bay. So if you're interested in any of this or have any feedback, please reach out to Pat Tarpey of LWA, and she'll relay that information to us. And if you own land in the watershed, you can also help by reviewing your property for any erosion or runoff issues and have them fixed. You know, landowners arguably have the most power to make a difference for the lake's health. There's that old saying of death by 1,000 cuts, and that often is so true for lakes. Every action, not only along the shoreline, but throughout the watershed, good or bad, has an impact on the lake's water quality. So educating yourself on how to properly manage your land and any of the activities that are conducted on it will go a long way to minimizing any impact to the lake. As far as specific actions you can take, there's so many that can help minimize stormwater and erosion impact to water quality. The two key elements of slowing runoff to keep in mind are both infiltration and filtration of pollutants. So we want to slow down the erosive power of stormwater to allow the ground to soak up the water and trap unwanted pollutants like nutrients before reaching surface waters. And landowners can play a huge part in this by diverting runoff to gardens or other retention areas, stabilizing shoreline access points or pathways, maintaining or enhancing buffers, and minimizing any use of chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, anything like that around your property. And there are so many resources available to landowners if you feel a little lost in getting started with all that. You can become certified through LWA's Winnie Blue Lake Smart program. Someone can come out and evaluate your property and give you great tips on what you can do. There's some great online resources that you can read and get a sense for what might be appropriate for your property. The UNH extensions, landscaping at the water's edge, New Hampshire DES Soak Up the Rain. New Hampshire has a homeowner's guide to stormwater management, and there's numerous fact sheets from DES on their shoreline rules, which can be really helpful in understanding what you can and can't do within, you know, so close to the shoreline. be sure to have your septic system inspected on a regular basis. We recommend 2 to 3 years. And you know, at least every 5 years, having someone really more thoroughly inspect your system to make sure that it's functioning and being maintained to optimal performance. And then if there's any future grant opportunities available to do work on private lands, you know, please be engaged with that and participate in that. That'll go a long way to helping our water resources. So that's what I have for you tonight. I again thank you so much for being here and participating. I'd like to spend the remaining time opening up a discussion with any questions you have for me or LWA. I would really also love to hear from all of you on what your biggest concerns and values are related to Wolfeboro Bay's water quality. Are there any known issues in the watershed that we should be made aware of and follow up on during the watershed survey? Things like that. So I will stop sharing my screen. And Bria, were there any questions that came out of in the chat?
Nope, not at all.
Okay, great. Well, folks can either unmute themselves and ask a question, or you can also use the raise hand feature. We can call on you. I see Frank, you're raising your hand.
Hi, I'm chairman of the Brookfield Conservation Commission, and as you showed on your map, a large chunk of the eastern side of the watershed is in Brookfield. Specifically, the two main sources would be Warren Brook, feeding in directly into which has its headwaters in Brookfield, and then also Heath Brook, which sneaks along the backside of Tumbledown Dick Mountain and empties directly into Crescent Lake. So, but it has its sources in Brookfield. Are you going to be doing point source pollution testing on those water bodies so that if there's something coming from Brookfield that you'll be able to let us know that there is silt or specific contaminants or something like that? Is that going to be part?
That's a great question. Thank you, Frank. So FPE's role in this project doesn't include sampling, but it might be something that LWA could look into. Also, we would certainly be gathering any existing data from the towns. So if it's a point source, like you're saying, potentially an outfall, the town may already have some data related to that. So we can help track that down, and we would include a summary of that in the plan.
Which town? Because it's not Brookfield.
Oh, well, we can certainly figure that out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're a very small town and we don't have the resources, nor I'm aware of Wolfeboro zoning, especially in Wolfeboro's master plan has they spent $40,000 on updating their master plan on water resources alone. I think a couple of years ago we had a presentation. Moose Mountain Greenways had a presentation on that. So Brookfield, no, we haven't done that. So I'm leaning from my point of view on the Conservation Commission, any additional help we can get from Wolfeboro, from other towns in the watershed to help us make sure that we're protecting our watershed that's what I'm looking for.
Gotcha. Yeah, we'll definitely follow up with you, Frank, because it sounds like that would be a good site for us to be sure we visit during our field survey. So it can at least be documented, and we can model a pollutant load estimate that would be likely coming out of a source like that. So at least you'd have modeled information, if not real data.
Yeah, I for Brookfield, I wouldn't be concerned specifically about point source pollution or even large amounts of phosphorus. I would be more concerned about improper logging techniques that are putting a lot of silt and other things into the waterways. So that would be more what I would suspect might be our issues over here. But you never know unless you test, unless you go looking for it. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Laura, go ahead.
I was going to just say, so what you were mentioning, Frank, those two streams flow into Lake Wentworth, correct? Is that what you said?
The Warren Brook is one of the main feeders for Lake Wentworth. And then, of course, then the Smith River, and then Back Bay, and then Wolfeboro Bay. And then the other one, Heath Brook, sneaks along the backside of Tumbledown Dick, and actually, I believe, empties into Crescent Lake, which effectively is Lake Wentworth, and same thing, Smith River, Back Bay, so the same thing.
Right, okay.
Brookfield's a little unique, and I'll just spend a second. We have 3 watersheds. The western part of Brookfield feeds into Lake Wentworth, and of course, then as Laura knows, it all winds up in the Merrimack. So that's the watershed there. We also, the bulk of our southern part feeds the Branch River, and then of course the Salmon Falls, and then the Piscataqua, and out through the Great Bay. So we have to be concerned there. And then the very tip of Brookfield feeds the Branch, I think it's called the Branch River, but it feeds Pine River Pond. It's Pine River, feeds Pine River Pond, and actually the Saco. So we actually have contribute watersheds to 3 major rivers here in New England. So it's something that I'm trying to do more education to the people in Brookfield that we're at the headwaters of the Branch River, actually. So just
Okay. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to relate that to, the Wentworth Watershed Association and the plan that was done for Lake Wentworth. So I think that area certainly would be revisited. And I did fail to mention Wentworth Watershed Association, who has done a lot of work in their watershed on remediation and mitigation. So they're very active, and they will be a partner in this project as well. Laura, could you go over maybe a timeline for people? I'm not sure if you
Oh, sure.
did that.
And I do have one other question in the chat when you're done, Laura, just so you know.
Sure. Yeah, so the timeline, we like to complete these plans in less than 18 months. So the thought would be by fall of 2024, we would have a final plan in place. This year, 2023, is really about gathering data. So this is where we're going to be gathering all historic water quality data and doing an analysis. We're going to be having a few meetings with the steering committee that Pat has put together to get feedback from those folks who represent kind of the major stakeholder groups. We'll be doing field surveys this spring into summer, the watershed survey that I mentioned and the shoreline survey, again, gathering all of that data so that by the winter time, we can really start the writing and the analysis portion of it, digging into the model and finalizing that, and in hopes to have a draft watershed management plan to send around and start reviewing by the spring to summer. And as part of this project, we do have a small chunk of funds that are going to Horsley Witten, the engineers that I introduced at the beginning. So when we've completed the watershed survey, we've gotten feedback from folks, and we've prioritized those sites based on the impact that those sites might have. So, and the cost that it might take to remediate those sites.
Town of Wolfeboro's watershed plan.
We will pick the top, 1 to 3 sites for Horsley Witten to do a more thorough field investigation, a field survey of those, and draft up some conceptual designs. And then one of those will likely move forward into a bit more of a detailed design, where we might also work with the landowners and get them on board, so that by the end of this project, we'll not only have a final watershed management plan, but at least one potential project that's fairly far along in design and can easily be used when applying for a grant to help pay for, finishing the design and installing it.
Okay, great.
Brenda Jort asks, hi, does the survey include Back Bay, and how can the Wolfeboro Conservation Commission help?
So Pat, I might need you to let me know
It
if
does
Back Bay is
include
part of
Back
it.
Bay, yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I guess with the Conservation Commission, you probably have lots of knowledge that Laura will need on some historical land use, and maybe current land use and developments that will be happening. Laura, did you mention a build-out analysis?
True, right. I did not specifically mention, it is one of the kind of falls under one of the models that we're running. So we're not only doing the nutrient load modeling, but we'll be running a build out analysis for the watershed. So that's going to project future development in the watershed based on today's current zoning and sort of maxing that out in the future. And I'm able to feed that information into the model to predict how that new development in the future would impact water quality, which can be really helpful exercise in just understanding maybe some room for improvement in existing ordinances that might better protect water quality in the future.
This is Warren Muir, who's part of Wolfeboro Waters. I gather that you're not going to do any sampling. I mean, there's a big gap in information. I mean, for example, we've in Winter Harbor have identified that one of the major sources is the phosphorus that's in the sediment along the shore. And to the best of my knowledge, there's no sediment core samples elsewhere in the watershed. There's very little information on the benthic cyanobacteria that exists in the watershed. And then your focus will be on a number of the sources. And there's some concentration measurements that have been done on some of the streams. But there's not flow information. And so there's no way to get prioritized based upon loading. Will you be doing anything on any of those topics?
Yeah, so this planning grant doesn't include any primary data collection. This is going to be all gathering existing data, but your questions are so important, Warren, and there are major gaps in our understanding of what's driving these cyanobacteria blooms. So part of the plan is identifying those gaps and providing recommendations for what additional monitoring can be done. But unfortunately, it won't be covered under this grant. As far as the modeling, yes, that's usually a major limiting factor when we try and calibrate the model, particularly with the tributaries. Yes, usually we're not working with any sort of flow data that's associated with, if there's any, phosphorus concentration samples from those tributaries. However, the modeling that we do in the land use coefficients that we use for New Hampshire and the region are pretty good, at estimating what the load is coming off these streams and into the water bodies. So, we have pretty good confidence in them as like a planning level effort. And then as more data is collected over the years, the model can be refined and tuned in to real data. But for now, we'll be limited to what we have. But the model is pretty good for the tool that it's used for in generating those estimates.
Laura, this is Don Kretschmer. Can I just add a couple of things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure, from the Lake Wentworth perspective. So Warren, most of the tributaries to Lake Wentworth, we do have flow data. We put gauges in maybe 10, 12 years ago. So we have flow data associated with most of the concentrations that we have in the streams. There's a couple streams that just are not easy to gauge. And just to circle back for a second to Frank's comment, Heathbrook ends up in Lake Wentworth, which then ultimately ends up in Crescent Lake. But that's just the way the plumbing works. And that's it.
Great. Thank you, Don.
Yep.
And I
Hi,
know
good
Wentworth
afternoon.
Watershed Association. Oh, go ahead, Julie.
Hey, Bree. Hi, guys. Julie Brown, the Executive Director for Wentworth Watershed Association. We are actively partnering with the Lake Winnipesaukee Association, as well as with Wolfeboro Waters, and are very in support of this effort. And I just wanted to comment on the gentleman from Brookfield. We do, as Don mentioned, we do monitor the streams coming out of Brookfield and into Lake Wentworth and Crescent Lake. And we have a watershed management plan that is 11 years old now and have been working very hard through funding to remediate through BMP's multiple sources. And we're actually in the process of recontracting FB Environmental to update our plan. So that updating may be happening at the same time as the Lake Winnipesaukee Bay's initial planning. So in partnership, it's going to cover the entire town of Wolfeboro. So it's a very exciting initiative, and we're glad to partner with them. And we're thrilled that Lake Winnipesaukee is actually going to get some attention towards what's happening with loading. So we are partnering actively in this study, and we're excited to be working with our partners, but just wanted to mention that we've been doing this work for quite some time, and we're thrilled to have Lake Winnipesaukee get some attention. Thank you.
Another question that just came in, how will the fact that Back Bay was once part of the town's dump be calculated in this plan?
When they say Back Bay was once part of the town's dump, I'm assuming they just mean that it was, or it's near the shoreline to Back Bay. So we do, I do take a look at the legacy contaminants that might be coming off the landscape. So, we use the one-stop DES database to look for legacy issues like that. An old dump site, if there's any permitted discharges, we're considering that in the model as well, whether they're a point source or whether we consider their potential increases to groundwater pollutant loadings from maybe that particular sub-watershed. We might fine tune those land use coefficients to account for that. So hopefully that answered their question.
I'll build off of that. It was, they threw the trash into the water and then eventually filled the which was Back Bay part in. And now what Back Bay is really was Front Bay is now Back Bay. And also was where they did a whole lot of logging. So in the soil at the bottom of Back Bay has all sorts of, probably chemicals, phosphorus. And is there any way to calculate or know what's coming from that?
Okay, so that makes a lot more sense. So certainly it'll, that's something that we can include in the plan and discuss. And if there's any data available in Back Bay where we could calculate a potential internal loading of phosphorus that might be generated by those increases in organic matter loading, we can certainly try and account for that. As far as any chemicals that might be coming off of any garbage that was dumped in there, unfortunately, we won't be able to quantify that in any way in this planning process, but it'll certainly be something that we can include in the plan as a potential pollutant source that might need to be addressed in a different way.
I have a question, or I'd like to make a statement from New Durham watershed. That is Shaw's Pond, and that goes via Beaver Brook, very scientifically back to Roberts Cove into the Wolfeboro Bay. We have been monitoring the phosphorus and cyanobacteria and that for many years in Shaw's Pond. I personally am the one doing the testing May, June, July, August, September. We have seen our phosphorus starting to creep up. So we started to do some of the other little tributaries going into Shaw's Pond and have found one is high, and we're repeating it again just to double check it. In the meantime, we've started a septic survey. And I wish I could say that one stop was going to be the end all be all. We were really hoping that was going to give us a lot of information, but it's technologically failing. And they tell you right on there, we have a problem. We know we have a problem. We're working to fix it, but I get nothing. I put in 50 houses, addresses, and I get nothing. But what I get from the town is 35% is unknown. We don't know what kind of septic systems these old camps have around Shaw's Pond. 26% is adequate. And 28%, they're older than 35 years old. That's been our experience.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Maureen. Unfortunately, that is fairly common across New Hampshire, and hopefully something that we can start to remedy over time. And I've been a part of many even door-to-door surveys, asking folks about their septic system and maintenance, and yeah, it can be a little eye-opening where some folks might not even know where their septic tank is located and have no idea when the last time it was pumped. So septic systems are this sort of quiet, unknown, underground source of nutrients that don't get as much attention as they likely deserve. So, but that's something that the shoreline septic system load will be modeled as part of this project, so we can get a sense for the direct contribution of septic systems around Wolfeboro Bay, at least within 250 to 300 feet of the shoreline. Septic systems throughout the watershed are sort of inherent to the land use coefficients that we use when they're farther away. So. See, were there any other questions in the chat, Bree?
Not in the chat.
Okay, I don't see any hands raised. Any other comments or questions?
Oh, Art, go ahead.
Yes, I live on Ross Pond, which is part of the watershed, and we have a couple of issues that have been created by the state relative to Route 28 and runoff, and so to what extent this plan can further amplify that or identify it as a possible source. And I can send an email to Pat or even to Don, I guess, so that we get on the list for places to check, because they redid one of the ditches abutting Route 28 and put stone in there, and it's been a real fast track storm runoff issue since then. And as a result, that ultimately goes into Russ Pond. So we're worried about it.
Yes, thank you, Art. Any information that you can send, any photos, maybe during an active storm, to see it? Anything you have like that would be great to send us, and we'll be sure to send one of our staff out to visit in the field and get it into the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and we've tried in past management plans to get New Hampshire DOT at the table and haven't really been too successful, but I think the more they hear from the local communities doing these plans, perhaps they'll become more receptive, but we will certainly invite them to the table.
I am not seeing any more hands raised. Oh, Russ?
Yeah, I sent a chat to you. We have someone designated to participate as the coordinator from Alton. How do we make that contact happen?
Yeah, Russ, I did message you back. I think I already have that person and I've contacted them.
Okay, so you talked to, it said Tom Divney?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Great, thanks. Yeah, the other thing is we just finished our master plan, updated it. And we also just finished updated our natural resource inventory. So those are two documents that are fresh that you can use. We just have what comes out of New Durham and Knights Pond as part of this particular effort.
Right, that will be helpful. 'Cause also, as part of this, Laura will be reviewing each town's ordinances and regulations, right? So comparing what people have already or municipalities have on the books. And maybe if there's things you're working on, it's good to know. I believe Wolfeboro's working on stormwater management ordinance. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're working with New Durham on the Merry Meeting River, which is something else entirely, but there's a whole study from and data on that and Coffin Brook and so forth. But the other thing I was going to mention while I'm on here, we can provide a boat transport for you from Piper's Point over to Worcester Island, that section of Alton, if you'd like it.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of know that, we know that area a little bit. So.
Yeah, that'd be great.
There is someone else with their hand raised, but it's just Pixel for your ID. So I'm not sure what your name is, but please feel free to introduce yourself and ask your question. You are muted. There we go.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon. I'm John Thurston from the Wolfeboro Planning Board. Thank you for having this. It's very informative. And I know you talk about stormwater as being one of the number ones, but how do you calculate boater congestion and the increase of boaters in these local bays and possible releasing of their septic loads at sometimes? Do you calculate that into your plan?
That's a really great question. So what you're talking about is overboard discharge, which has been something that we've considered and included in the past. It just, but it's certainly not something we commonly consider, but I'm going to be working with Don Kretschmer on this model, and we can dig into that a little bit more. And if we feel like, yes, it's something that we should try and quantify, then we'll try and get the information we need to do that. So
Thank you.
if there's any, and if anyone knows of records that would be helpful for us to have a rough idea of the extent of that problem, how many boaters might be doing that on an average day, in the boating season, that would be really helpful.
Scroll through one more time, see if I see anyone. And if you do have a question and I don't see your hand, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead, but I am not seeing any.
So also whether or not you're on the steering committee, we have a committee of roughly about 12 people, but we are going to be trying to share information as this project moves along with everyone who might have interest. So I just want to mention that we will, we'll notify the Conservation Commissions and the Wolfeboro Waters and the Lake Wentworth Watershed Association, et cetera. So hopefully everyone will stay informed. And so, Laura, I don't know if you want to mention next steps or what's the first thing. We have some internal tasks we have to take care of with New Hampshire DES, but then I think maybe the watershed survey will be the first thing.
Yes, yeah, that would be the next thing. So probably late March to April, we'll have hopefully a steering committee meeting to get some more information about specific areas that we should visit in the field. We'll compile the information that you've all mentioned today. And so we'll be doing field maps and gearing up for that. And that it's really going to be the major first piece of this project is gearing up and completing a watershed survey, hopefully by May.
Okay, great. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I guess we can wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you all for coming tonight. I look forward to working with you over the next year plus on this project.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.